This is Ohio EPA's webinar for applicants who are interested in applying to the Volkswagen funding cycle, the Diesel Mitigation Trust Fund, which is open at the moment for applications for cargo handling equipment, airport ground support equipment, and switcher locomotives. So my co-presenter this morning is Alan Harness in our Division of Air Pollution Control. I am Carolyn Watkins in the Office of Environmental Education. And the basic division of labor for the two of us is Alan is the engine guy and I am the money lady. So depending on the questions you have, you've got contacts there for both of us. We will have these slides posted to the website later this week, and we will post the questions and answers from today's session. Tomorrow we will do this webinar again. It's the same webinar. You don't need to sign in twice. It's just offered twice in case the time is more convenient. We will update the Q&A, post that to the website, and we will continue during the next few weeks until early August. While the web cycle is open, we will be updating the Q&A about every 2 weeks so that everybody has the benefit of seeing the head scratcher questions that we've been asked and that we're trying our best to answer so that those answers are available to everyone. So please do not forget to double check that on the website. I'm going to go ahead and move into the next slide now. So just a snapshot of where we are in the VW funding. This is our grant cycle. We have just about $4.5 million available to applicants in our 26 priority counties for those categories. Grant requests between $50,000 and $2 million. Usually that is for 75% of the cost of your project, but check on the per project amounts in the grant application guidelines. If you have a project that you're looking for more than $2 million in funding, please contact me and let's discuss it. We have some flexibility with these funds and some other funds that we have available to try to put those things together for projects that may not fit strictly within those guidelines. So please keep us posted on that. So we released the application guidelines on June 6th. We're doing a webinar today and tomorrow, same content. As I said, the Q&A will be posted. And please note the applications are due in the online software no later than 3 p.m. on Friday, August the 12th. Please note that 3 p.m. is a hard deadline. That is a function of our software. So if you try to submit the button, hit the submit button on your application at 3:30, it will not accept it. So please be very much aware that 3 p.m. We will announce application awards no later than November of 2022, depending on how many applications we receive. We may be able to make that announcement quite a bit sooner than that, but that's the best we can promise, thinking ahead to what our workload is likely to be. So for today's presentation, many of you are already familiar with our VW program. So I'll just very quickly mention a couple of program priorities and some lessons learned. Then some notes for all applicants this cycle, and then some specific notes by sector. And then we've put in some new screenshots of what the application form looks like. So we will walk you through those so you get familiar with the software. So just very quickly overview, the Volkswagen settlement made funding available to the states to try to offset some past illegal emissions that were made from diesel vehicles. Ohio's share of that is about $75 million based on $2.7 billion that went to all of the 50 states. Ohio's share is the 10th largest of the states based on 16,000 vehicles in the state that were illegally emitting pollution. So we are putting out $75 million total. We've been working on this for about 5 years now. The settlement was written very, very tightly. The states have 4 places where they are allowed to spend the money and 10 allowable use categories to try to impact air quality in areas that bear a disproportionate share of the button. So this is just an example of all of the different things that the states had to consider in developing their plan to spend the funds and developing their maps of where the funds could be spent within the state of Ohio. So that is a picture of Ohio's plan. You can see the whole plan on our website. And this is a map of our 26 eligible counties for these funds. Please note that for this grant cycle, we are not making any differentiation between the first priority and the second priority counties. So any of those counties that are in either blue and white hash marks or yellow, all of those counties are equally eligible for this grant cycle. So these are some of the things that we looked at when we were first doing public comment on how to spend the VW funding. And the most requested categories were school and transit buses and EV charging. But we also are very concerned about funding projects for these large engine categories, locomotives, tugboats, airport ground support equipment, and heavy trucks, because we get very good emission reduction per grant dollar invested on those. So Ohio allocated just over half of our funding for on-road and about 25% of our funding for these off-road categories. We still have some funding left in these off-road categories, which is why we are doing this round right now that's open. And we are in the process of awarding the last of the available funding we had for EV charging stations. So this is just a quick look at the amount of funding that we've allocated for projects in the dark blue compared to what was allocated in the light blue. The dark blue is what we've already spent. So we have funding still available and still to be awarded in 3 of those categories. And our overall timeline for the equipment funding, we put out $15 million a year in the first 3 years. With the 2020 pandemic and the subsequent economic disruptions, we saw some changes on that. Not as many people were able to apply given the economic disruptions. Of course, the pandemic was very, very hard on the airline industry in particular, so we've not seen the applications we had anticipated originally. But what we did last year, we did an off-road cycle, and we awarded a little over $4 million for switcher locomotives and $2 million for cargo handling equipment. This cycle, we have about $4.5 million available, and it is the same 3 categories that we were looking at last cycle. While this is open, we are looking at our results by sector, and we will do a minor amendment to Ohio's plan. We will put that through public comment before we allocate any remaining funds after this cycle. And then just a heads up, we are going to do an electric school bus pilot project that was in our original plan. We are going to release that later this year. Some of you may know US EPA has some federal funding open right now for electric school buses and for alternative fueled school buses. And we are trying to make sure that our pilot project dovetails as smoothly as possible with that ongoing federal funding. We also have awarded funding for EV charging stations. We put out a little over $3.2 million last year for the level 2 or slow charging stations at a number of different locations. And we are currently reviewing. We asked for $8 million in applications. We received $80 million in applications. So a lot of interest in funding for fast chargers. We are reviewing those applications and hope to be announcing those awards fairly soon. So just a general tip that we've noticed in the past rounds of equipment funding was that many applicants just did not give us enough information in the text box sections that lay out the scope of your project. So it's important, and I'll give you some examples of those as we go through, where we really do need you to look at the questions that we're asking and make sure you are giving us an answer to all of those. The only category that has to provide us engine conformity certificates for this cycle is the switcher locomotives. So if you are operating an existing Tier 3 or older switcher locomotive that you're looking to replace with these grant funds, you will need to get that engine conformity certificate from US EPA or the California Air Resources Board. Alan is happy to help you if you have questions about that. The other caveat I would give to everybody is you are using an online application software. We've made it as simple and easy to use as we possibly can, but it is a new experience for folks, and I would encourage you, do not wait until that second week of August to start working on your application. Just at the last minute, if there are a lot of people working in the system at once, it may slow down a little bit, so do not procrastinate on this. Get started soon to get most of your application in place, and then you can make adjustments before you hit the final submit button. So that scope description, where we really want to see details in some of those text boxes, the method by which your old engines will be decommissioned. Are you going to drill a 3-inch hole in that old engine? Are you going to send it to a salvager? Are you going to have it shredded? We need to know that detail before you do it. How are you going to ensure, if it's mobile equipment, that it's going to be operating at least 75% of the time in our eligible counties? And then one of the things we're looking for is some information on how you will ensure that that equipment is going to be maintained for 5 years after the grant. And the reason we're concerned about this is that you may have staff who have been maintaining diesel equipment for years, but if you have to get them retrained to maintain all electric equipment, how are you going to train them? Do you have the charging in place for all electric equipment? Or if you're switching to natural gas or something similar on a locomotive, how is that going to happen? What is your access to fueling or charging on that? Because the grant will not pay for the charging station. So we need to see all of that explained in those text boxes. Equipment owners can request up to 75% of all electric equipment. And there are some lower caps on some of the alternative fueled switchers. If you ask for the full 75%, as your application is competing with other applicants, you might find that asking for less than 75% will make your application more cost effective, because we're looking at who to award based on grant dollars invested per ton of emission reductions achieved. So you might have two different entities asking for exactly the same cargo handling equipment, and which one is more cost effective will depend on the old equipment you're replacing, how many hours it was operating per year, so that we can see how much emission benefit we're getting. And if you ask for 50% and your competitor asks for 75%, your proposal will be more cost effective. So be aware of that and be strategic in your thinking about how much you need from the grant and how much you want to ask for. If you have non-road equipment that was operating less than 1,000 hours per year, you will not be able to enter that into the application form. We just went ahead and took that out because across the board, we found that it was not going to score well enough to be funded in the grant competition. So it needs to be, for the last year or two, operating at least 1,000 hours per year. Engine conformity certificates, as I mentioned, that's an issue only for the switcher locomotive operators. Talk to Alan or me if you have a question about that. All right. There we go. We are not requiring that you provide a quote for the salvage value, the scrap value of whatever equipment you are taking out of service. But be aware that we will award you the grant based on the quote, the cost that you submit with your application. But when you request reimbursement from the grant later, we will ask for that scrap value receipt that you received, and that will be deducted from your grant amount. But we're not requiring you to provide that in advance. It was very hard for folks that were having trouble getting those scrap quotes from scrap dealers, and so we've just understood that's an issue. So we just want to make sure you are aware of it. I saw a question come in the chat. Yes, we will make these slides available. They will be posted on the program website by the end of the week, and we will continue to post the questions and answers from these sessions and the questions and answers that Alan and I are fielding by email or phone. We will continue to update that Q&A about every 2 weeks over the summer while this grant cycle is open. So these slides will be available for you to see and use. We are no longer allowing leased equipment. It just doesn't meet the grant requirements with a third party owning it when you have to certify decommission of the old engine. And because if you're trying to pay down a loan over multiple years, you are not meeting the timeline that we have to have these funds spent and reported to the VW trustee. One of the things that we are happy to do, we would like for you to talk to us early while you are still designing your project and give us a good idea of what you're doing so that we can wave you on or wave you off any parts of it before you've spent a lot of time writing the application. Then as you put your application into the online software, we will be happy to pre-review it for you and give you our comments. Now, please, what you do is you will enter it all into the software, but don't hit that final submit button. What the software will allow you to do is to generate a PDF of your application, and then we need you to email that PDF and the fleet data spreadsheet, which has to be an Excel file, not a PDF. If you email those to Alan or me, we will review your application while it's still in draft form and give you any comments or suggestions we have. Please ask for that no later than August the 6th. Please understand that that last week before the deadline, we are very, very busy helping applicants, and so we can't give your application or your draft as much attention that week as we could the week prior. So we encourage you, put your application together, enter as much as you can, and then let us take a look at it. We'll be happy to give you suggestions on that. After you make changes in response to those comments, you can then generate and save a new PDF of the later final as submitted version. So the software will let you do that. And just one thing, please respect our time. We can pre-review it once. We are not able to pre-review it every time you change a paragraph. So if you are an insecure new grant applicant, just please be aware you get one pre-review to a customer. If your application was not successful in a previous year, you will have to fill out a new application again. Most importantly, please be sure to update your attachments, in particular your quote that you would be providing from an equipment vendor. If that quote is more than 6 months old, and particularly right now as prices seem to be very volatile and mostly going up, please get the most current quote you can to submit with your application, because the grant award is dependent upon that and we're not able to go back and increase it later on. If you have a previously funded application that is still open, please talk to me about the closing date for that. We may be able to allow you to apply again, but we will consider the amount of funding that you may have already received compared to other grant applicants during this grant cycle. So if you have an open grant for anything other than EV charging stations, is perfectly separate. But if you have an open grant for anything else that you might have received previously from us for this kind of program, please talk to me before you resubmit or submit a new proposal. The fleet data spreadsheet is an Excel spreadsheet. You put the engine information for the old equipment, that's the make, the model, the idling hours last year. Many of these do not have a VIN number the way that a truck would, for example, but you can put your engine serial number in that VIN column, and you put all that in on the left side of the spreadsheet. And then the new equipment that you want to purchase, you put in the engine data for that on the right side of the spreadsheet. We ask you to upload this as an Excel file, not as a PDF, because we will take your Excel file data and upload it into US EPA's diesel emission quantifier tool to run an emissions estimate for your project. So if you send us that as a PDF, Alan will be contacting you saying we need it first as an Excel sheet before we can do anything with it. If you are a for-profit or not-for-profit fleet that is not government, you will have to show us your ability to fund the project. These are reimbursement grants, so you have to show us that you have the ability to make those purchases of equipment and then wait for reimbursement from the grant. So normally that is done either with a credit rating that is in one of these categories, or you can give us a letter from your financial institution that says that you have the funding available, or you have either a line of credit with them. And that letter needs to be very specific as to how much cash you have available that you can draw on to make that purchase. Oops, sorry, I think I went the wrong way there. Okay, so how do we decide who gets funded? In each application cycle, we rank applications by cost effectiveness, both overall and then within each category. So for example, What is the highest ranking airport ground support equipment project? What is the second highest? What is the highest ranking cargo handling equipment category, and so forth. We then select the highest ranking in each of the silos and work our way down until we run out of funding. And we do primarily look at cost effectiveness of the grant dollars at bringing down emissions, but we also do consider balance between the sectors to meet with our plan in terms of how much we said we'd spend in the different categories. And we do look at geographic balance in making awards. So that's making sure that the funding is spread as equitably around the state and the 26 eligible counties as we possibly can. You are not required to estimate the emissions for your projects. We will do that for your project using your spreadsheet of fleet data, and US EPA has a diesel emissions quantifier tool. It is on their website. It's fairly easy to use, input, output, but the answers you get on emissions are only as good as the data that you give it. And Alan is very expert in using this. If you want to run the deck for yourselves, you certainly may. Just be aware that we will be using our estimates and not your reported estimates if you provide them in terms of assessing projects, just to make sure that the ruler that we use to assess all different projects, we're using the same ruler for everyone. So the deck will come up with different estimates for a project depending on the age of the old equipment that you're retiring. If you're retiring older, dirtier equipment, you're going to score better in terms of emission reductions. If that equipment operated more idling hours, you will score better. So for example, we may have two different airports competing. They both want to buy 5 new airport tow tractors. One may be more cost effective than the other because of the older ones they're replacing, being operating more hours, being older and dirtier, whatever, that may score better, even if they are proposing to purchase the exact same equipment. And then this round, we are not making any differentiation between the yellow counties and the blue hash counties. All 26 counties, we encourage applications from any of these counties. If you have a project, please talk to us. We do require competitive purchasing, so note that you may provide a quote from a vendor for a certain type of equipment, but it may be that you end up with a different quote once you do your eventual purchasing process. Grant recipients are required to use the purchasing processes that are applicable to them under state procurement laws. Private sector entities, be aware we are not requiring you to go out for bids, but we will look at the pricing that you submit in the quote that you submit with your application to make sure that it is compatible and in line with what we see in terms of pricing for similar equipment nationally and in other Ohio projects. Some local governments are required to use competitive purchasing processes, and you must follow the law on that. Many local government entities who own this kind of equipment use state term contracts or other competitive purchasing agreements, and we encourage and applaud the use of that. You'll just need to present that pricing to us with the quote for your equipment when you submit your application. And then there's one sticky thing for consultants. Just be aware, our software only allows you to work on one application at a time with one email address. So that either means if you're helping multiple clients apply for this funding, you have to finish one and submit it before you start the next one, or set up different credentials with different email addresses for each client that you are helping with this so that the system will handle your proposals separately. All right, just a couple of notes in the different sectors. Freight switcher locomotives, we are looking to upgrade pre-Tier 4, so Tier 3 and older switcher locomotives. They have to have been operating at least 1,000+ hours per year to whatever the current emission standards were for that engine. And then what we will do is look at new diesel or alternative fuel or zero emission if you're going to all electric or you're going to gensets. The Ohio Rail Development Commission helps us very much with our assessment of rail projects, and they are also available to help you. You can contact Tom Burns at the Ohio Rail Development Commission if you have questions about this for upgrading switchers. For airport cargo handling equipment, airport ground support equipment, we are looking to upgrade either eligible diesel or spark ignition equipment. Has to be operating outdoors, and the only option for this category with this funding is to upgrade from old diesel or spark ignition to new all-electric zero-emission equipment. So we are doing cargo handling equipment, gantry cranes, large industrial forklifts, tow trucks, baggage handling, or electric vehicle tows, baggage tows, that kind of thing. We are not funding trucks in this cycle. So if you're using fuel trucks at your airport or plow trucks, drayage trucks, those are not eligible this cycle. This cycle is strictly for off-road equipment. So filling out the grant application software, please, please, please read the directions before you start. The application guidelines is posted on our website at VW Mitigation Grants, and that website you have at the very beginning. I would go to that particular grant cycle, pull that up, and bookmark that particular page. Please, please read those directions before you apply. I don't want you spending a lot of time on an application if your project is not eligible. Read the directions, talk to Alan or me if you have questions. You will need to set up an account in Ohio EPA's Customer Support Center. You can do that today. You can do that anytime. Usually your account credentials will be issued within 1 business day. Right now they're running pretty well in terms of getting those issued the same business day that you apply. Anywhere on Ohio EPA's web pages, at the bottom of the page, there's a blue bar with a link to the Customer Support Center. So you can access that anywhere on the page. So there's Ohio EPA's VW application cycle page on the OEE website, and then there's the Customer Support Center, and that's where you will be submitting your application. So what you will do is get your credentials, which is just basically your name and your contact, so that you can work in that system, get together the information on your existing equipment, what is your make, your idling hours, your fuel use, and so forth. Gather your quotes for the new equipment or engine repowers that you want to do, and begin entering that in the application cycle. So please, first you want to go to the grant program website, that is this VW Mitigation Grants web page. And these links will be live when you see it posted on the website, when you see these slides. And then right down below all of those pretty pictures where it says grant offerings and guidance to grantees, the very first accordion drop-down is for this 2022 request for applications to replace diesel off-road equipment, or those couple of examples on airport ground support, we can do spark engine equipment, but most of the program is for replacing diesel. So go to this page, bookmark this page. This is where your grant application guidelines are. And you see further down on that, and I'm sorry, on every Ohio EPA webpage, scroll down, scroll down, scroll down, because all the good stuff is going to be below the fold, below that first screen. But you see there's a bullet link there's links for the 2 webinars today and tomorrow. There's a link for creating an account and password in the customer support letter. Instructions to apply for a grant. That is how to manipulate the software. And then that 2022 request for applications. Those are the directions. That's the grant application guidelines for this grant cycle. That's what I would really encourage you to print that out, get to know it, be familiar with it, and keep it handy as you are working. The fleet data spreadsheet, you've got a map of the eligible counties link. Excuse me, you've got the fleet data spreadsheet as an Excel document. You can download that here from this page, or you can download that from within the application software. Either way, just remember that's the one attachment that needs to be uploaded with your application as an Excel spreadsheet and not as a PDF. So just be aware of that. There is also an applicant certification statement, and that is where whoever is filling out the application, you want to have the person who will eventually be signing the contract, the authorizing agent for the project. So this is going to be who is basically in charge of giving the okay for you to apply for this grant and then have the funded project move forward. You'll need to have that entity check off the boxes and sign the certification statement that, yes, I certify that we've had this equipment operating in the right places and for the right amounts of time, and I promise that we will purchase the new equipment and we will maintain it in accordance with the manufacturer specifications. So your client, if you're a consultant, your client has to make this certification, not you as the consultant. So be aware of that. We need to see an original signature on that document, and then you upload it as a PDF after it is signed. You can download that as a Word document so they can look at it and sign it. When you are ready to upload your application, the application software will ask you to upload additional things. That's your completed fleet data spreadsheet, your applicant certification statement, signed, and then your quotes for the new vehicles or new equipment. And then for locomotives, you will need to have that additional certificate from the California Air Resources Board or US EPA. Talk to Alan about that if you have questions. Any EPA webpage, you can go to the bottom of the page and you will see this blue link to the Customer Support Center, and that's where you can get started, get your credentials. This is where the software for the application is located. You can go in, create an account, which is to either log in or sign up. This is where you can ask questions and someone at the agency will read and respond these within a day or so. You can search, and you see that search box. You can search under VW or DMTF, Diesel Mitigation Trust Fund. Those will pull up any questions. They will pull up the published answers, which is here's your project selection criteria, here's how to apply. That further down where it says instructions to apply for a grant, that is how to use the software. Not the same as the grant application guidelines for this cycle, but I would encourage you to have both and keep them handy, either bookmarked or printed out as you are working. Bookmark the instructions to apply for the grant. And then as you see before, you can click the Submit an Application tab to access the online application. So when you get into the software, here's the instructions for how to apply. And while you're in the Customer Support Center, you see this Find Resources, Ask a Question, Submit an Application, and Log in. So if you want to submit an application, you click that. If you are not logged in with credentials, it will not let you work on an application. That's why you have to get your credentials first in the Customer Support Center. So it will let you log in here, your username and your password that you chose, and then down below it lists a whole bunch of different grant programs. So usually our Diesel Mitigation Trust Fund will be the second or third on the list. And where you see it, it will pull up the instructions so you can look at that. But unless you are logged in, it will not let you open a grant application and start working. Once you are into the grant application software and working, you will see in the upper right corner where it says welcome and your account and your log out. So you're logged in, you're working, and then across the top of the page are all of these what we call train stops. So you can see what part of the application you're working in, and you can move your cursor back and forth between those green train stops to move around. And so as you're working in each one, be aware that in some sections, that second arrow I put in to the right says Screen 2. So some of the sections of the application have multiple pages, so you can keep track of where we are. So in this section, for example, this is the narrative section, and this is a text box to be filled out. So it says, what are you proposing to do? And you told it what you wanted to do. You wanted to replace 5 pieces of airport GSE, and your purchase quote is $1 million. And so it's saying, what is the description of how vehicles are used prior to completing grant activities? So the old equipment that you're wanting to replace How was it used? How often? And that's where I'm wanting you to fill in some detail in this text box. Every time you'll see a back for going back to the previous page and a next. Every time you leave the page and go forward to the next page, it will save your work. So even if the power goes out, or if you get onto a phone call and you get bumped out of the system after 20 or 30 minutes, it will have saved everything you did prior to leaving that last screen. So when you first get into the application, and it will be asking what kind of project you want to do. And it will take you down different chutes. If you're applying for a switcher locomotive, you will get different questions that are specific to switcher locomotives. If you're applying for airport GSE or for cargo handling equipment, it will ask you questions just based on that. Now you can always go, and let's say you happen to operate both a switcher and some airport ground support equipment, you can apply for both kinds of projects in the same application. You can always go back and add more. But at the beginning, you will have this select your vehicle type, and there's a drop-down menu, and that is for the 3 types of equipment that we are funding this cycle: airport GSE, cargo handling equipment, or switcher locomotives. And then it will ask you, are you trying to replace an old one or repower an existing one to have a new engine? Those are your 2 opportunities. And then for everything except switcher, the only fuel type that is allowed for the new stuff is electric. So GSE or cargo handling equipment, the only thing we're funding is replacing old diesel with new electric. And then you will fill in the number of vehicles, and then they will ask you, have you saved the blank fleet data spreadsheet? Because you know you're going to have to fill it in. You answer that, and then you click next, go to the next page. And then it will ask you to select from our drop down of 26 counties which counties your equipment is operating in. And you may be operating a switcher locomotive in 2 different counties that are both eligible, and you're trying to replace them both. So you would select from the drop-down list, and then you can always add another county and select again to be able to apply for projects that are happening in multiple counties. This is an important question. Is your equipment that you want to replace currently operating? It has to be currently operating for the last 2 years in order to be eligible for replacement with grant funds. So we're asking you to certify this about all of the vehicles that you're asking for funding to replace. And then eligible model years, for example, for switcher locomotives, that has to be a pre-tier 3 or older. Tier 3 or older, and Alan can help you with that if you have a question about what your existing locomotive is. Most locomotive operators have a pretty good idea of that. For airport GSE and for port cargo equipment, the old year does not matter. It will be any eligible year that you are still operating, you've still patched it together, it's still out there running. Any year is going to be eligible, but really replacing a really new one is not going to be as cost effective as replacing an older, more polluting one. So this is where it's going to ask you, how much is this going to cost you? And in the first box, you put, what is the total cost to you to do the project? So if you have a quote for $1 million for these pieces of equipment that you want to buy, you put your $1 million in the first box, and then in the lower box, you put what dollar amount you're asking from us. So if, for example, you want to ask for the full 75%, you would enter 750,000 in the second box. It will calculate the percentages for you. We want you to enter the dollar amounts here based on what you're choosing. And then it will generate, okay, this is what you asked for. You asked for 782,000 from Ohio EPA. You're offering this much match, which is what you have to do, the difference between what you're asking from the grant and what the total project cost is. There's your total quoted cost. So let's say in this example that your quote was for $1,050,000 in that. So it calculated for you that you're asking for 74.5%. And just be aware that it's going to tell you, you might be more competitive if you only ask for 50% than if you ask for the full 75%. This is just a reminder that you are competing for grant funds with other entities, and you want your application to be competitive and successful. So current use, this is one of those text boxes where I really want more than a sentence here. I would really like some explanation of how the existing vehicles are being used, where, if they're able to be used in more than one location. All of the text boxes give you 1,000 characters, and there's a little counter there that will keep track of, you're at 600 words or so forth, so you can keep track. If you really are good and want to give me good detailed information, you can always upload an additional document with your application if there's not enough room in that text box. The problem that we've had in the past is that applicants give us too little information in the text boxes rather than too much. And in particular, if you are changing fuels, so your employees are going to be maintaining electric equipment when in the past they've been maintaining diesel equipment, are they certified to do that without voiding your manufacturer's warranty? Are they properly trained to do that? Do you have fueling or charging available on site? These are the things that we want you to explain, and particularly we are paying attention to that training your people to operate the new equipment. If we're going to buy you a very expensive piece of electric equipment, we want to make sure that your folks know how to maintain that properly. So what is the procedure that you will use to make sure that it's being fueled and maintained according with the manufacturer spec? Again, more detail in this text box is better than less detail. The more you tell us, the greater confidence we have that you will be able to operate the equipment properly. So then you get to the portion of the application where you can upload attachments. And you can click on this little add box as many times as you need to. Some applicants prefer to get all of their attachments together and upload a single PDF and a single Excel spreadsheet for the fleet data. Other applicants want to upload them separately. So you may have a quote. Your quote may run to multiple pages sometimes, so it's okay with us if it's a long document for a quote, and then you have the separate certification statement. However you want to do that, just the one reminder that your fleet data does need to be an Excel spreadsheet so that we can upload that directly into US EPA's diesel quantifier. But other than that, you can do an additional PDF or an additional document there so that we know what you're doing and we have a good understanding of it. And then you are asked to sign. Now, the certification statement that you uploaded, that needed to be signed by the fleet owner or the equipment owner who is responsible, who needs to know that they are committing to take an old engine out of service in order to get equipment that is the new equipment being funded by the grant. This time, your signature is by you as the consultant or you as the fleet supervisor, whoever's filling out the grant application. This is saying that, yes, I am authorized by this company or this entity to submit a grant application on their behalf. So you don't have to find the CEO and have him come right in with his finger, the signature on this. This can be from you, who is the person authorized to submit the application. So everybody clear on that? The signature and the software that you can fill out with your finger, that is who's applying on behalf of this applicant. When you upload the applicant certification statement, that is the one that I need to see a signature by the person who is going to be responsible for contracting for that, so that they know that they are required to maintain the equipment, they are required to replace an old engine, they are certifying to that. So two different places where we need a signature, not the same person's signature unless it's a very small company and you happen to be doing your own grant application. So finally, when you get to the point where you're getting close to submittal, if you've already uploaded your additional documents, your certification statement, your quote, your fleet data, if you want to go back and see any of that you've uploaded, where it says up there in the top right-hand corner, welcome, your name, account, or logout, if you click on account, that is where you will go to see your uploaded documents. You can see your application anytime you log into the software, but to see the uploads, you go to that account and find it. So that's a quick introduction to the project, and I have a pop quiz for you guys today to see if you were paying attention. What is the latest time to submit a grant application this cycle? True, false, the school district can apply for all electric school buses this cycle. And true, false, an airport can apply for gasoline or CNG fueled ground support equipment this cycle. And the answers to your pop quiz: 3 p.m., not 5 p.m. on August the 12th, Friday, August the 12th. We are not funding school buses this cycle. We will have an electric school bus pilot project funding later this year, but this is not that opportunity. And remember that for ground support equipment and cargo handling equipment, the only fueling option we will fund this cycle is all electric. So that is a function of the VW settlement and what we're allowed to support. So I hope that was giving you some help. This is Alan's contact information for any engine questions, my contact information for any money questions.